Welcome to the Riverbend Awareness Project.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast episode are solely those of the individuals participating and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of Riverbend Media Group or the Riverbend Awareness Project, its affiliates, or its employees. It is important to note that the discussion presented is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified healthcare professionals for any medical concerns or decisions. The Riverbend Awareness Project is a product of Riverbend Media Group.
Welcome to the Riverbend Awareness Project. Today we're talking about National Adoption Month.
Yeah.
We have Drew Pendlebury and Amber Peterson from Pendlebury Law Offices. I'll go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll start with some questions.
My name is Amber Peterson. I've worked for Drew for almost 6 years now. I specialize in the adoptions in the office, and I am a family law paralegal. I also am the office manager. So
she does a great job.
Thank you.
I'm Drew Pendlebury. I'm an attorney. I've been licensed here in Idaho for about 25 years, 26 years. And we have a pretty broad range of practice. It includes adoptions. We love doing adoptions. Kind of the only time that you leave the courtroom and everybody's happy. So we love doing them, and we're grateful to be here with you guys today.
Thanks for coming. We're glad to have you. First, let's start off. What are the different kinds of adoptions that are out there? Like, I know you can do private ones and using agencies and stuff. So let's kind of talk about those for a minute and the differences between them.
Sure, and there's I guess it kind of depends on how you classify them. There's no real formal classifications. Obviously, there's adoptions that come through an adoption agency. Those are usually when somebody's looking to adopt a child, but they don't know somebody. Those are usually when you're going to use your private adoption agencies, and they work with agencies that work with mothers who are putting children up for adoption. And they kind of build that network. And so when they do those, that's usually because you're trying to find a child, and those companies are really good at trying to, okay, these are the children that are available for adoption, and then trying to match up those parents. A private adoption is more when you probably know the child or know the parents, and it's either coming through as a step-parent adoption, or it's coming through you know the family somehow. You know there's a connection outside of the agency, and I guess we classify those as private adoptions. But it really just depends on how you learn about the child and how you start that process of going through the adoption and wanting to build that relationship.
How long does the adoption process usually take?
It's a great question, and it really is very specific on each adoption case. If you think about it, there's a couple things that have to happen in every adoption. Number one, you've got birth parents, and the first thing that has to happen is you have to do a termination of those birth parents' parental rights to that child. So before you can actually get to the adoption process, you have to do that termination. And sometimes those terminations are very quick. They're consensual. They can come in and they can consent in front of a magistrate. It happens very, very quickly. Other times you have to get that termination, and you have to go in front of the court, have a trial, prove the grounds for termination, which are usually either abandonment, abuse, or neglect, or something like that. And you have to prove that because this is a protected interest under the Constitution, and it's a fundamental right. You have to prove it by clear and convincing evidence, which is kind of the civil standard of beyond reasonable doubt, right? So it's higher court standard. And so if you have to have the trial, then of course these can take months. They can take maybe up to a year, depending on if the person who's fighting the termination has private counsel and they have to do the discovery. So they can be quite lengthy in that respect if you have to go through that process. But if you go through an adoption agency, most of the time that work is kind of pre-done. They've got the consents. The other time that you can have a termination is if the Department of Health and Welfare gets involved and they do a case plan. Somebody's not able to complete the case plan, and then they do a termination as part of that. Then you kind of move on to the adoption process. So the adoption itself really doesn't have to take very long. but it's going through that termination process to get to the adoption that takes that time. And then, of course, there are some other things that may have to happen. For example, if this is a step-parent adoption, so one parent is terminating the rights of the other parent because they're in a new relationship, you don't have to do necessarily a home study. If this is an adoption from two individuals that don't have a familial connection to that child, then you'll often have to do that home study. And that takes, how much, Amber? About
a month.
3 months?
Month and a half, 2 months. Yeah, it depends on the caseload of the caseworker at that point in time.
How quickly everybody can get together and do those checks and do those interviews and everything that way. So the process is really varied depending on what needs to be done in that individual case.
Anywhere from what? A month and a half to 6, 7, 8 months, depending
we've done
on the
some
case.
as quickly in about a month. Yeah, you can get through it. But those are probably the exception. They're usually a little bit longer.
So you mentioned a home study. So what is a home study and what is the purpose of a home study?
Great question. Home studies are really, if you think about when the court looks at an adoption, they have an interest to make sure that this child's going to be placed in a home that is a good home, a stable home, that there's resources for the child. You can imagine that the court's not going to be really keen on placing a child in a home with active sex offenders or drug users, those types of things. We want to discourage that. So the home study, if you think about it from that end, it's the eyes and ears of the court to do the investigation into the home, do the interviews, make sure that the parents are going to be able to raise a child, that they're physically, emotionally, mentally, all the above, ready to take on raising a child. And this is a good home for them. So again, I don't think I've ever seen a home study. Maybe, Amber, you can think one that's even questioned, because usually, usually by the time people gone through in that adoption process and we filed, they get weeded out. Either they know on their own that they're not going to pass a background check or pass a home study, and they don't come forward with those. But really, it's just making sure that everything's in line so that when the court does that adoption, that there's a level of certainty and satisfaction that this is a good thing for this child. It's going to be a nice, stable, happy home.
I know with my family, we had to do one to adopt my little brother. We knew his birth family. So when we decided to take that on, we had to do the whole home study, and anybody that was of age had to get a background check and all of that to make sure that we were clear to have him in our home.
They definitely delve into criminal history. I think that some people don't realize that they do delve into your whole past.
That doesn't mean
which is not a bad thing.
No,
but
if you made a mistake years ago and gone through things, that's not necessarily an automatic, check the mark, black mark, never going to do it.
But it will be explored.
It will be explored. It'll show up on the home study.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then is it like just one visit, or is it kind of a couple to kind of see?
My understanding, and I don't sit in on these, but I understand they do several visits. And maybe the first one's just an introductory and director type things. But I don't think there's necessarily a set format, whether it has to be one visit or many. I think as long as the person who's doing the home study evaluation can get the information they need, if they can get all that in one visit, great. Sometimes there's forms that get submitted beforehand. They review it and they see everything. And then when they walk into the meeting, they're kind of ready for that. They're prepared with the questions. They know what they're looking for. And this is kind of just kind of checking all the boxes along the way. But of course, they could go back multiple times if they need to, if they have further questions.
Makes sense.
Ultimately, at the end, they provide a report that gets filed with the court that just outlines the parties, outlines the home situation, just gives the court, an idea that this child is in the best care that can be.
Best home they can give you.
For sure.
Yes. What are the legal requirements for becoming an adoptive parent in the U.S., or I guess even just in the state of Idaho?
Yeah. There are some statutory provisions, although if you think about it, the courts and the legislature are interested in making sure that just this is done for the right reasons and the right circumstances. So if you look at the statutes, you're supposed to be 15 years older than the person you're adopting. which makes sense
Yeah.
in most cases. Although you go right back in the statute and it says, unless you can show that you've been the parent, acting as a parent for this child for more than a year, that's an exception. So you kind of have the bright line rule, 15 years older, but there's some room for maneuvering within that based upon the unique circumstances of every case. You're supposed to be 25 years old, unless you can show that you've been acting as a parent for more than a year, all these kind of things. So really, it's you have the guidelines that are there, but then, of course, there's exceptions that you can try to convince the court that you fit in one of these exceptions, and you can kind of maneuver around that. But beyond that, there's no other age requirements. There's possibilities for people who have disabilities to have adaptive care that can still adopt. And we've talked about the criminal history. Of course, you got to pass a background check for whatever is there. But again, there's no hard and fast rules with those types of things.
It makes me think, not real world examples, but like Lilo and Stitch. Like in that movie, I don't know if there's a 15-year age gap between, obviously it's not real, but like in my world, I haven't had a lot of experience with knowing about adoption. So like that thought, like, oh, well, what if it was like an older sibling that was taking care of a younger sibling and they've been taking care of them, but they're not yet 25. So like thinking about that as an exception, kind of.
Yeah, and that makes sense. But again, the question would be, why are they looking to adopt them? Why don't we just be a guardian? There's other avenues to take care of children through guardianship and other de facto custodian type things without going through the formal adoption. And there's you'd probably fit in those other with a sibling. It would, I think, be a little unusual if we look at the birth certificate and said that one sibling was the parent of another.
That's true.
Yeah.
And so we would use one of those other mechanisms.
Sense.
Guardianship would probably be the one to stick out to go take care of the child.
Some of the guardianships do actually end up after so long turning into the adoption, though, after it's been established. And then
we've had several cases where they've started with an adoption, and after a year or two, they go, well, the parents aren't getting back involved. And
you started with a guardianship, you mean? And then went to adoption?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
I have a cousin dealing with that right now. They took guardianship of a kid about a decade ago. The mother stepped back in and wanted him to come back. So that happened just recently in the last year or so. She's decided that, no, I don't want my child anymore. So my cousins were the first people they went back to, and they're taking it from just a guardianship and adopting him now.
Yeah, and again, the different legal requirements to become a guardian as opposed to actually terminating a parent's parental rights and doing the adoption. But it sounds like in that case, maybe you've got a mother that just kind of decided that now she's going to give consent, and now the timing's right.
She had him in foster care for a while, and they were a foster care family to begin with. And then he was given the choice, like, if you can go back to any family that you've been with, where would you go? And I'd like to be with them.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And adoptions and guardianships as a whole, you think about it, we've done this in society for thousands of years, probably back to the Neanderthals, when if one child didn't have a set of parents in one situation, they were living with somebody else. Now, as we've advanced, we've codified it, we've put all these statutory formalities in place, but we're really doing what's been happening really as long as there have been families there and people have been taking other children and raising them as their own and taking care of them. It's just kind of a, I guess, fairly modern in the last couple hundred years or so that we actually say, oh yeah, we have to do this adoption formal process here.
Yeah. I think mainly it's, that they have the familial unit already, but it's not solidified until that birth certificate reads the same last name as the parents that raised the child or children. So,
yeah.
So if someone was looking to adopt, or I guess even do like a guardianship or foster, kind of those options of, okay, taking care of a child that's not biologically or legally theirs, what are some things they should look for in either a lawyer or an agency?
Oh.
Sorry.
No, that's
that was a real long-winded question.
Do you have an answer to that one, Amber? What would they look for?
I mean, honestly, if you're going to trust your home life and this potential child, I would say that you would like the person that you met with when it comes to an attorney. Mm-hmm. I don't know much about agencies, to be honest with you. I do have a friend going through it right now. The agency has gone through and terminated the parental rights of the parent of the child, and now they're ready to adopt. And so they do have to kind of go through that process through an attorney and not through the state so much anymore. But just be comfortable with who you're with. Somebody that's, honest and, somebody that makes you feel good. Because like we said, we enjoy these cases. There's not a lot of heartbreak and drama that goes on in these cases. And so, I would find somebody that you feel comfortable communicating with, somebody that will answer your questions. There's a lot of different factors. I think it's more just comfortability and people that, sharing as much excitement as you have about the whole process. And that's why I do enjoy them. I was adopted by my stepfather too, a million years ago. So it's always been a joyous thing for me too. And then when back during COVID times, they would do these via Zoom, and the judges always ask these kids these questions, and sometimes these little guys just say the cutest things that just it just pulls at your heartstrings. So I got lucky to see a couple of those, and I have been to at least one in the courtroom and have the younger kids really talk about their experience and excited for their daddy or mommy to be their legal daddy or mommy. But I think it's all choosing an attorney. It's all about just who you feel comfortable with and who has a good track record, of course. There's quite a few different circumstances, I guess, in there that some people check off those boxes and some people don't. But
yeah, I think, like Amber said, finding the person that you're comfortable with and can explain things. People come in and we'll have consults with adoption cases. And sometimes we just realize that adoption's just not in the cards yet. Mm-hmm. But I think someone needs to be someone you can trust, to be honest with you, and just understand that there's a whole spectrum of options that are out there. Just because you're caring for a child doesn't mean you have to move right to the adoption. You could do things at a very, very benign and very low level, like a parental power of attorney. Just get the parents to sign over so you can provide medical care for the child when they're in your care. That's a really non-obtrusive way for the parents. They kind of still retain their parental rights, but they're kind of delegating those parental rights to somebody. It doesn't go to court. It's very informal, but it allows somebody to go forward and get the care they need. And then you kind of move further along. And if the parents aren't able to really be that involved, or there's reasons that the parent's authority should be overridden, that's kind of when we move into the guardianship section. And so there's a whole area there that we can work through and try to make the things fit. And then it's those further cases where really the parents either have totally abandoned the child, they're neglectful, there's abuse, those types of things that it just says the parents really can't be involved anymore, and they're probably not ever going to be in that position. We need to make a more permanent, stable condition with this child. That's when you're in the adoption. So I think just having somebody explain all those different pathways and what they all mean, and making sure that the how do I say it, that the remedy fits the situation, mm-hmm. rather than just going to terminate parental rights and move on to adoption. There's a lot of things that could happen in between there, but getting the good advice, getting comfortable with the advice that you're given, I like Amber said, I think that's the most important thing. You got to trust who you're talking to.
That's really cool. I don't know if I made that connection, right? That very legal of termination of parental rights in adoption. So it's awesome that there's a spectrum of options of involvement or less involvement from the legal parents and trying to take care of that child.
Yeah, it's a good thing we don't just go to terminate parental rights. Right,
yeah, no, that's really good. I think that's awesome.
That is a difficult process. People may think that it's easy to just say, oh, I want to terminate my rights and be done with this child. That's not that easy.
The judge that was in charge of my brother's adoption actually kicked his birth parents out of the courtroom when they went in to do it. Because they turned him over to us and went in a day or two later and tried to sign the rights away. And he was like, no, you're going to go home and think about this for a month, and then you can come back and talk about it.
Yeah, exactly.
No, and because Because there is that you have that fundamental right under our Constitution and laws in our country, a fundamental right, highest level rights to raise a child. And if we're going to terminate that, and I think the courts are very good about saying, hey, you need to be certain this is what you want to do, because once you terminate and once the adoption happens, you're not going to go back and undo that.
Is that something that can be done? Can a parent go back after an adoption's been finalized and try and get their rights back?
After a child turns 18. But I mean, there's no way to.
Yeah, no,
Once
there's
done.
not really once an adoption is done, and again, that kind of goes to our desire for finality and stability. We don't want children to be adopted and then go back and undo adoption. So it's a very, very intentional process to get to that adoption, knowing that these are permanent. These are permanent things we're doing here. We're severing permanently one set of relationships, and we're permanently creating another set. And so because of that, there's very limited opportunities to undo that. Now, what's interesting is if you go back in this and say this is a step-parent adoption, there actually is a provision in our statutes that you can try to go back and undo that, but only if the adoptee and the adopting parent both agree that the relationship between the natural parent and the adopting parent is severed, and the court has to be satisfied that they're not only doing this because he doesn't want to, the adopting parent doesn't want to pay child support or something like that. They're trying to get away from the financial things. So again, very limited opportunities because you really are. You're severing that one set of relationships and you're creating another one. Now, if you were to go back and undo an adoption, just think about what you'd be doing. You'd be now severing the adopted relationships, and then you're kind of in limbo with that other set. Mm-hmm. Do you go back and now reconnect to a natural parent? No, probably not. So now we've severed something, and so adoption statutes are again they're designed. The whole process designed to be a very permanent solution to an issue that's out there. In fact, it's very unusual that you see this, but in our statutes, there's a provision that says, except for cases of fraud, and that's the fraud by the adopting parent, unless there's fraud at 6 months after a divorce, an adoption is final. At 6, you can't undo it. And then it even goes so far to say, okay, if for some reason something get overturned and the adoption is undone, then the parent who's seeking to undo the adoption now has to go back and pay all the medical costs, the legal fees, and all the other costs there to care for that child and go through this process of termination adoption to begin with. So you can see our legislators very intentionally put things in place to say, hey, no, this is something that we don't want to be undoing.
Yeah. It's very serious. You need to think about it and be certain.
Yeah, be certain walking into it. Mm-hmm. Because this is a very permanent thing we're doing. Yeah. But I've only had maybe 2 or 3 phone calls over years.
Never even seen it in my years.
Where people have tried. and usually the answer is, no, good luck. You're stuck. Yeah.
Yeah. My brother's, I think it was his father, a few years after the adoption, he'd gotten divorced from his wife and went and asked, what are the chances that I could get my kid back? And he got told there's probably not a chance of that.
Yeah. Slim and none, and Slim just left town. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. And that was about where that ended. Yeah. How can prospective adoptive parents prepare and navigate for the adoption journey? Like, are there tools out there or things to help them with that?
There's nothing on the self-help website, is there?
Not
on the
much.
adoptions, I don't believe. Be prepared for a home study for sure if you're not. I mean, even if you are, if it is a step-parent adoption, it would be something that I would research just in case.
Yeah, and every case, it's hard to say there's a blanket group out there that whatever can do it, because every adoption is a little different. The background of why the parents are adopting and how they get to know the child and whether it comes through an agency or whether it comes through a friend. I mean, all of those things are so different. And sometimes you can prepare for them and sometimes you can't. Sometimes the opportunity just thrusts itself and suddenly you've got a neighbor that, maybe has a teenager or a younger mother that's having a child not ready to take care of it. And you're the natural fit. And boy, you better get ready because that child's coming at some point here. And maybe you've got 9 months to prepare for it. Maybe you've got 1 month. Maybe you've got no months. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to say how do you prepare. I would probably just say just talk to people, talk to your friends, talk to your family, make sure that this is the right thing to do. Going back to that permanency we've talked about, this is a very permanent thing you're doing. Yeah. No give backs.
No give backs. Yeah. It's always in the best interest of the child.
Yeah. Yes, it is. How often do you guys see open adoptions?
In Idaho, none. We don't have an open adoption statute.
No.
And so in Idaho courts, if that right's terminated, that right's terminated, and that's a complete termination. Now, you can have people talk about it, and I've had several cases over the years where people come in and say, we kind of want to do an open type adoption. And what I'll generally counsel both sides when I can, or have the other attorney counsel if they're with that parent, say, you guys can make agreements, but they're not going to be binding on the court. And if the adopting parents choose not to do that, there's very, very limited, if any, recourse for the other. So Idaho really doesn't have an open adoption statute. So it's done. It's permanent.
I did not know that.
Yeah, other states I think may have some provisions written in that you can get it's an open adoption and they're entitled to X amount of contact or photos or whatever the situation may be. But yeah, I don't know.
Or in the alternative, the child turns 18 years old and makes their own decision.
And they make their own decisions. Exactly right.
I had a question, I think, about kind of when we were researching like questions to have an informed discussion. I saw there was like, especially like the idea of awareness for adoption, that kind of push, not necessarily, I don't know if that's the right word, but like older children, so like teenagers being adopted. Have you guys seen like a fair amount of, is it equal that people are like adopting like babies versus kids versus all ages? Okay, the
all
spectrum.
Ages
okay,
sure.
sorry. That was like another roundabout question, but I'm like, how is that
you're okay.
in Idaho? Like,
that's all over the place.
We've done a couple cases. I mean, even most recently, within the last couple of weeks, we had an 18-year-old that wanted his name changed. He was an adult, but we completed, the adoption and a name change mainly. We've also done, he's 16 years old, about ready to get his license. He wants his driver's license to read the last name of the dad and mom. Well, one of the natural parents, but the last name of the adopting parent, to reflect on his driver's license. Again, it does kind of go back to that familial unit with you being an actual part of that family because you share the same last name. So
I did another adoption just a couple weeks ago, or within the last week or so. A 26-year-old who'd been raised by stepdad since he was 10 years old. Wow. Been the only parent he'd ever known. And it was just a kind of a fun, just being there in the courtroom. And of course, you always ask your standard questions, but of course, and anybody over the age of 12 has to consent to the adoption. So, of course, the questions go to this individual. And I said, well, why do you want this? He goes, well, I've had a little bit longer to think about this than most, 16 years, right? But why do you want? And just the purity of the answer was, this is the person I've always known as dad. He's been there. He helped me through my teenage years. He got me through my rough spots. But now I call him every day. And the reality of what we're doing in those situations, even though this is an adult adoption, we're just really formalizing what's already been there for a long time. And it's great. And those are great because there's the two parts, right? There's the termination, which can be icky. And you're kind of doing all the talking about how a parent's failed the child and abandoned the child or neglected or abused the child. And you go through all that nasty stuff, the termination. And the courts are really good about doing that at a separate hearing. So when we get that termination and we come to the adoption, it is just great because you're there to put families together. And, as lawyers, sometimes we pull them apart and are involved in that process. That's the ugly part. But when you get to be there and you get to see these families that are bonded and it's a good thing, it's just a perfect experience. Amber and I talk about if we could do just adoption work, do a full practice
We
of
love
that,
them.
we'd do it. Right? Get rid of all the other ugly stuff.
Right. Let's do the ugly stuff. Get rid of that. Yes, and do the happy. Because usually the judges will take photos with the family too. Some don't like to, but I love the judge photos or
I make them do it all the time.
I love it.
In fact, with the adult adoption the other day, one of our judges said, "And do I bring out the teddy bear as well, or the stuffed animal again?"
Yes.
I said, "You could probably forego that on the adult adoption here, but too funny."
That's really cool. Is there anything else that we?
I don't have any.
I think I was good. Was there anything we didn't discuss that you guys wanted to make sure that we did talk about?
Talking about maybe, well, just going back to, it's not that easy to just terminate your rights.
Yeah.
By law, I don't know, is it statute that somebody has to be there to step in to care for this child financially?
There's some different, not really statutorily. And our courts have kind of gone back and forth on this, because we get the occasional call. I just want to terminate my rights. My response is usually, it's not your call, right? You can't just go and do that. And you think about why the courts would not just allow people to go, I'm done. I'm done being a parent. I'll terminate. It just doesn't work that way. So usually the courts are expecting that there's going to be somebody else to kind of take over to care for that child financially, emotionally, all the ways that we would need them taken care of. And so it's really, again, it's a big thing to terminate a parental right. Going somewhere with that, and I got to remember where I was going. Okay, so because of that, most of the time the courts are going to say, "Yeah, we're not going to terminate." Now, I've had several times over the years where the parents just get along so horribly, and this isn't going to get any better. And the judge will look at that situation and say, "Okay, for the child's best interest, I'm willing to sign off on a termination of the other parent's parental rights." But even then, usually there's some kind of safeguards financially, people who are going to step in. And so we've done, oddly enough, in those situations, we've done an adoption where a grandparent steps in as the adopting parent, because that puts now somebody else in place of a parent to provide guidance, support, all the above. And so, of course, we make sure that those birth certificates are marked adoptive to make sure that there's no weird questions that come up down the road. But we do that. And so that's a way to kind of get around, father really wants to be terminated on his parental rights. That's a way we can get around that. What's interesting, though, and we didn't talk about this very much, but we have to get consent from. So if a father's going to step in or grandmother's going to step in and take the role of that parent on the birth certificate, and for all legal purposes, their spouse has to also give consent, which also makes sense if you think about it, because we don't want people going around adopting children without their spouses knowing about it. It all kind of makes sense. But yeah, there's a way, there's a solution to most issues. And that's where attorneys are wonderful, because we can kind of help. Okay, here's what you're trying to do. Here's where kind of the statutes and the public policy kind of guide us. Here's how we can help make this work if everybody's on board. So it's fun. It's like putting puzzles together.
It is like putting puzzles together.
Well, thank you guys for coming in. We appreciate your
Thanks for
time
having us. It was kind of nice to step out of the office for a minute and come talk about what we love.
Yeah, this is fun stuff.
And I learned a lot, more than I ever thought about. So that's good. Hopefully other people do too. And
Great.
they're more aware of families and adoption. So
For sure. Thanks for having us.
Oh, and I will do the outro. Sorry. Thanks for joining us on the Riverbend Awareness Project today. If you, I'm going to do that again. Sorry, Maddie. Gonna have to
edit right there.
Yeah, edit right there. Thanks for joining us on the Riverbend Awareness Project today. You can find episodes wherever you get podcasts or on the Riverbend Media Group podcast page.